The sun beat down hard on Southfield Avenue that afternoon, the kind of midsummer heat that seems to melt the paint off old street signs. The sidewalk in front of Marlowe's Market was quiet, except for one man. He stood alone, a stooped black gentleman with silver hair, wearing a frayed brown overcoat despite the heat. In his left hand, a plastic bottle of water still cool from the store fridge. His name was Raymond J. Carter, but no one called him that anymore. Not out loud. He didn't speak, didn't block the sidewalk. He simply existed, quietly, peacefully. And for Officer Derek Hall, that was more than enough reason to strike. He strode up in black boots that clicked hard on the pavement, puffed up with the kind of power that doesn't come from service, but from fear disguised as control. He didn't ask for ID, he didn't offer a warning. "What are you loitering here for?" Hall barked, finger jabbing like a bayonet. "You think you people can just hang out in front of a white man's store?" The words hung in the air, slicing through it like a whip. A mother gripped her child's hand tighter. A young man lowered his eyes. No one moved. Carter merely nodded slightly. No argument, just a subtle step back. But Hall wasn't finished. He grabbed the bottle of water from Carter's hand, hurled it to the sidewalk. It burst open, cap flying, water spilling across the concrete like blood in the sun. Then it came, the punch, a brutal, full-bodied swing that knocked Carter to the ground. His head hit the sidewalk with a sickening crack. His hat, a weathered fedora with faint silver embroidery, rolled across the street like the last remnant of dignity lost. No one helped. Not yet. A college student, hands shaking, raised his phone and hit Go Live. A teenager clapped a hand over her mouth. A boy cried. And Officer Hall? He stood tall, smirked, whispered under his breath, "All these old fools are the same." But the cameras were still rolling, and somewhere a spark had just caught fire. You see, they didn't just punch an old man, they punched a memory. They punched everything some of us spent a lifetime building. They punched a story that refuses to die in silence. If you've made it this far, comment below. I remember dignity. Because in this story, silence isn't just complicity, it's permission. And this time, we won't look away. The video of Raymond J. Carter lying unconscious on the hot Baltimore sidewalk didn't just spark outrage. It sparked something deeper. A question: who was he? At first, people called him the victim, the elderly man, or simply the man in the brown coat. But then slowly, as the clip kept circulating, memories began to whisper. "I remember him," said Dolores from Cherry Hill, voice trembling on a local news interview. "He used to come by with hot meals every Thanksgiving. Never missed a year." A retired teacher chimed in, commenting online, "He once paid for my students' college textbooks when no one else would. Didn't ask for credit, just said, 'Let her learn.'" Raymond J. Carter was never famous. He didn't want to be. But in those days, back when the city still had hope glimmering in its eyes, he was everywhere. He fixed broken fences, sat with lonely veterans, and slipped $20 bills into the palms of struggling single moms without saying a word. No cameras, no speeches, just kindness, repeated like prayer. He was a Vietnam veteran who returned home not to glory, but to a country that barely looked at him. Still, he served again, this time on his own streets. Baltimore was his post, and service was his calling. But like too many black veterans, too many elders who build without asking for thanks, his legacy faded into the cracks of the concrete he once swept clean. When the police punched him, they didn't just strike a man, they struck a memory the city had tried to forget. Local archives revealed faded photos, Raymond shaking hands with city officials, receiving a modest plaque for decades of community service. Somewhere in those boxes was a newspaper clipping from 1991 with the headline, "The Heart of Southfield Avenue." But no one had read it in years, until now. Word spread fast. A retired postal worker, Glenn R., posted a photo of an old check Raymond had written him after Glenn lost his home in the recession. "He didn't judge me," Glenn wrote. "He saved me." A pastor recalled how Carter would quietly leave shoes outside the church steps during winter. Always the right sizes, always anonymous. One by one, the city remembered. And with memory came grief. How could they have let him disappear? How had they let someone like Raymond J. Carter become invisible until the moment he hit the ground? A new mural appeared on a building near Southfield. It showed Raymond not in pain, but standing tall, handing a book to a young boy. The caption beneath it read, "We forgot his name, but never his impact." For older Americans watching this unfold, it struck a personal chord. How many of them had watched their own service, their own sacrifices, dissolve into a world moving too fast to care? Carter's story wasn't just his. It belonged to an entire generation of men and women who gave quietly, suffered privately, and waited their whole lives for someone, anyone, to remember. So now they do. And if you're still with us, type in the comments, "I remember people like him." Because stories like his shouldn't fade into silence. They should rise like a bell tolling at sunrise, reminding us that dignity never expires. It only waits to be seen again. The water had dried, the blood had darkened, but the old fedora still lay there, alone beside the sidewalk cracks on Southfield Avenue. It was a soft brown hat, frayed at the brim, the kind of thing people once wore to church or Sunday dinner. But stitched into its faded band, in silver thread almost too worn to see, were the initials, RJC, with honor. Most passersby walked right past it. Some were afraid, others were numb. But one boy, just 8 years old, stopped. His name was Elijah. He held his mother's hand, his small frame almost hidden behind her coat. But his eyes were wide, not with fear, but something deeper. He saw the hat, and for a moment, the world went quiet. "Mom," he whispered, "why did they hurt that man?" His mother didn't answer. Her lips trembled, her eyes glassy. She didn't know what to say. Elijah stepped forward, breaking through the wall of silent adults. Slowly, he knelt down and picked up the hat with both hands, as if it were something sacred. Something heavy with meaning he didn't yet understand. That image, one small boy holding a wounded man's hat, was captured by a stranger's camera phone. And within hours, it spread like fire across the internet. People didn't share it because it was graphic or shocking. They shared it because it said everything words couldn't. A child, unafraid to touch what the world had just thrown away. That hat wasn't just a piece of fabric anymore. It became a symbol, a testament to what had been forgotten and who had picked it up. Soon after, people began to ask, "Who is this boy? Where's the man who wore that hat?" A local journalist wrote, "That boy carried more courage in his 2 hands than the entire city did that afternoon." Older viewers, especially those who had watched similar moments decades ago, during marches, protests, and long tear-streaked nights in American history, felt something stir inside them. "I remember a time," one retired nurse commented online, "when we held our elders like treasure. Now we walk past them." The boy, Elijah, didn't speak to the press, but when asked later why he picked up the hat, his answer was simple: because it didn't belong on the ground. That single sentence, innocent and true, was printed on protest signs across Baltimore the next morning. Because it didn't belong on the ground. It wasn't just about the hat. It was about Raymond, about dignity, about a legacy we dropped in a child too young to carry it, picking it up anyway. Elijah's small gesture became the spark of something larger. People gathered at Southfield Avenue not to scream, but to remember. Some brought flowers, others brought photos of Raymond from decades ago. Veterans stood in silent salute. And through it all, the boy's image holding the hat remained on posters, pins, even painted onto walls. Not as a symbol of sorrow, but as a symbol of what can happen when one person chooses compassion over fear. So if you're still watching, tell us in the comments, have you ever picked up something the world left behind? A memory, a promise, a person? Because sometimes the smallest hands carry the weight of history, and sometimes all it takes to lift a legacy is one child brave enough to bend down. At first, it was just murmurs, a few online comments, a single flower placed near the faded chalk line where Raymond Carter fell. A homemade sign appeared taped to a lamppost. "We remember Raymond." Another scrawled in trembling cursive, "With honor, still." No sirens, no speeches, just whispers. But for a city like Baltimore, where the pain had long simmered just beneath the surface, whispers were enough to start a storm. By the next evening, a small crowd gathered on Southfield Avenue. Not to protest, not yet. They simply came to stand, to be present, to say, in the quietest way, "We saw it too." Among them were veterans in old uniforms, retired teachers who had once walked to school beside Raymond, single mothers he had quietly helped. They stood shoulder to shoulder, not speaking much, just watching the spot where a man's dignity had been shattered. Some brought candles, others brought stories. A former city bus driver stepped forward, eyes watery, holding up a photograph of a young Raymond helping an elderly woman onto a bus in the 1980s. "He didn't work for the city," he said softly. "He was just there, always helping, never needed credit." That photo was shared online within minutes, and that's when the silence truly began to break. Not with a scream, but with memory. One by one, stories poured in like rain after drought. Raymond had fixed broken front porches, shoveled snow for widows, mentored teens who no one else believed in. There were no records of these things, only hearts that remembered. And for many older Americans watching the story unfold, it felt achingly familiar. "I know a man like that," one 70-year-old viewer wrote on Facebook. "He lived on my block, died last year, never made the news, just made the world better." The generation that knew what it meant to work quietly, serve without thanks, and be forgotten, they saw themselves in Raymond. And they saw something else too, that silence could no longer protect the truth. By day 3, churches rang their bells at noon, one chime for every year of Raymond's service. They didn't wait for city approval. By day 5, local high school students painted a mural of the brown fedora, larger than life, with the words, "You punched a memory, we remember." And still, no public statement, not from City Hall, not from the police department. But silence this time wasn't safety. It was an alarm. People started asking questions. Who trained the officer? Why was he still in uniform? Why hadn't anyone stepped in? A quiet fire had started, not of rage, but of reckoning. Raymond's name became a password of conscience. You could hear it whispered at bus stops, spoken softly at diner counters, scribbled onto church bulletin boards. And in homes across the country, especially in the hearts of elders, there was a collective shudder. Because they knew this wasn't just about one man. It was about what happens when we forget the ones who built the ground we now walk on. And so, slowly, power began to tremble, not because it had been shouted down, but because something older, deeper, and far more enduring had awoken. Memory. If you've stayed with this story, tell us in the comments. Who is someone from your past we should never forget? Because sometimes change doesn't come with a bang. Sometimes it begins with a whisper that refuses to die. Officer Brent Callahan sat in the precinct break room like it was any other day. He was leaned back in his chair, heavy boots on the table, a lukewarm cup of black coffee in one hand. The television on the wall, muted, was playing the latest coverage of the Southfield incident. Footage showed the boy, Elijah, holding Raymond's hat. Then it showed Raymond himself, still bleeding in the heat. Brent didn't flinch. He took a sip, smirked, and muttered to no one in particular. Guy looked like he was asleep on the sidewalk. Maybe someone should have tucked him in. A younger officer across the room froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. "What did you say?" he asked quietly. Brent looked up, eyebrows raised, a smile curling like a rusted blade. "You heard me." The room fell silent. It wasn't the first time Brent Callahan had said something like that. He'd always had a way with words, as his captain used to say, usually followed by a wink and a shrug. Over the years, Brent had racked up over a dozen complaints. Use of force, racial profiling, verbal abuse. None of them had stuck. "Good instincts under pressure," read one internal review. "He gets the job done," another. And so Brent stayed. Year after year, case after case. Praise from above, silence from below. But this time was different. This time, the city wasn't looking away. A video surfaced, grainy, taken from someone's phone. It showed Brent in the hours after the attack on Raymond, laughing, mimicking the way Raymond fell. "Boom," he joked, like a sack of potatoes. It wasn't just tasteless, it was radioactive. Within hours, the clip was viral. Headlines followed. Officer mocks assault victim. Laughter inside the precinct. Baltimore's shame. That night, the station's phone line crashed from the volume of calls. And at the center of it all sat Brent Callahan, confused as hell why people were so upset. "It was just a joke," he barked at a supervisor. "You people are acting like I pulled the damn trigger." His voice echoed down the hallway. But this time, no one nodded. No one chuckled. In fact, some officers turned away. Others stood up and left the room. Brent was beginning to notice something different. The quiet wasn't the same anymore. It was no longer camaraderie. It was condemnation. By the end of the week, 2 junior officers handed in formal statements condemning Brent's comments. One was Latino, the other, Black. Both had once worked shifts with Brent, laughed at his stories, even shared coffee with him. But not anymore. "I was raised to respect the badge," the Latino officer wrote, "but not if the badge hides a coward." Brent's arrogance began to crumble. He barked louder, blamed cancel culture, said the media had twisted his words. He filed a complaint against his own department. But behind the scenes, the reviews of his record had begun. Old complaints, long buried, resurfaced. 2014, arrest of a Black teenager for jaywalking. No body cam footage. Broken wrist. 2017, shoving an elderly woman during a protest. Written off as accidental contact. 2020, suspension for inappropriate comments during a sensitivity training. Sealed. Never made public. Now they were all on the table. The mayor's office was silent, but in law enforcement circles, the writing was clear. Callahan wasn't just a bad apple. He was a liability. That Friday, a formal review board was convened, not to punish, not yet, to protect the department's image. "They won't fire him," muttered an older officer at the edge of the room. "They'll just move him, like they always do." But something had changed. Outside the precinct, citizens stood with signs. No chants, no microphones, just quiet determination. One sign read, "Laughter is not justice." Another, "If this is who you protect, who are you serving?" And in homes across the country, older Americans, many of them veterans, many of them parents and grandparents, watched, horrified. Not just by what Brent had said, but by how long people like him had been allowed to wear the uniform. This wasn't about one man anymore. It was about a system that had chosen silence over integrity. As the board deliberated, a local reporter said it best. "If you laugh at the fall of a good man, then maybe you were never standing upright to begin with." Brent Callahan was suspended without pay the next morning. He didn't understand it. He never would. But for the rest of the city, for those who remembered Raymond Carter, for those who had ever been mocked, ignored, or made to feel invisible, it was a beginning, because justice doesn't always come with sirens. Sometimes, it comes with silence that finally refuses to laugh along. The city had begun to stir, not with the clamor of protests or the blare of sirens, but with a quiet, persistent awakening. Raymond J. Carter's name, once forgotten, now echoed through Baltimore's streets, whispered in church pews, and etched onto handmade signs. In the days following the incident, community members gathered at the spot where Raymond had fallen. Candles flickered in the evening breeze, casting soft glows on the pavement. Children chalked messages of love and remembrance, their colorful scrawls a testament to a man many had never met, but now felt connected to. Local newspapers began to delve into Raymond's past. Archives revealed a life dedicated to service, a Vietnam War veteran, a mentor to at-risk youth, a volunteer at local shelters. Photographs surfaced of a younger Raymond, standing tall in his uniform, a gentle smile on his face. Stories poured in from those who had known him. A former student recounted how Raymond had tutored him in math after school. A single mother shared that he had once paid for her groceries when she was short on cash. Each tale painted a picture of a man who had quietly touched countless lives. Elijah, the young boy who had picked up Raymond's hat, became a symbol of the city's renewed conscience. His simple act of respect resonated deeply, especially with the older generation. Veterans saw in him a reflection of the honor they held dear. Grandparents saw the hope of a future that remembered its past. Community leaders organized a memorial service in Raymond's honor. Held at a local church, the pews overflowed with attendees. Speakers shared memories, musicians played hymns, and the congregation joined in singing Amazing Grace. Tears flowed freely, not just for Raymond, but for the collective realization of how easily society overlooks its quiet heroes. Inspired by Raymond's legacy, initiatives sprouted across the city. A scholarship fund was established in his name to support underprivileged youth. A community center dedicated a reading room to him, filled with books and resources for children. Murals depicting Raymond's life and contributions adorned building walls, vibrant testaments to a man who had given so much without seeking recognition. The police department, facing mounting pressure, initiated an internal review. Training programs were overhauled, emphasizing community engagement and respect. Officers attended workshops led by local leaders, fostering dialogues aimed at rebuilding trust. National media picked up Raymond's story. Segments aired on evening news programs, and articles featured in major newspapers. The narrative shifted from one of tragedy to one of redemption and collective responsibility. In homes across America, especially among the older population, Raymond's story struck a chord. Letters poured in from veterans, retirees, and grandparents, sharing their own experiences of being overlooked, their contributions forgotten. They found solace in the city's efforts to honor Raymond, seeing it as a beacon of hope that their own stories might also be remembered. Elijah, now a familiar face in the community, was invited to speak at schools and events. With youthful sincerity, he spoke of kindness, respect, and the importance of remembering those who paved the way. His words, simple yet profound, inspired many to reflect on their own actions and the legacy they wished to leave behind. As months passed, the city continued to heal. Raymond's name became synonymous with compassion and service. His story served as a reminder that every individual, no matter how quiet their contributions, holds the power to impact lives. For the older generation, Raymond's resurgence into public consciousness was more than just a tribute. It was validation. It affirmed that their sacrifices, often made in silence, mattered. It rekindled a sense of pride and belonging, reinforcing the belief that it's never too late for recognition and gratitude. In the end, Raymond J. Carter's legacy transcended the boundaries of Baltimore. His story became a national testament to the enduring impact of humility, service, and the profound difference one individual can make. Baltimore wasn't the same city anymore. There were no marches, no shouts echoing down Southfield Avenue. But something had shifted, quietly, deeply, like the first stirrings of spring beneath a frozen ground. After Raymond J. Carter's funeral, the city found itself in a season of reckoning. Not from pressure or politics, but from memory, from truth finally spoken aloud, and most of all, from the quiet courage of ordinary people. The police department, long shielded behind protocols and paperwork, began to open its doors, not just figuratively. Town halls were scheduled. Officers were required to attend empathy training, and for the first time, a line in their handbook read, "Respect is not policy, it's humanity." Inside the force, older officers sat with younger ones, some teary-eyed, others stone-faced, sharing regrets they'd carried for decades. Mistakes made, chances missed, injustices ignored. It wasn't punishment, it was confession and healing. Meanwhile, the people of Baltimore stepped forward, not in protest, but in purpose. Community centers reopened. Retired veterans offered to patrol school zones. Church groups knocked on doors asking, "What do you need?" instead of, "Why don't you speak up?" And then there was Elijah. The little boy who had picked up Mr. Carter's bloodied hat now stood taller than anyone could have imagined. In one televised address to the city council, he spoke with a calm most adults couldn't muster. Why did a child have to be the one to pick up an old man's dignity? There was no applause, just silence and shame, and the beginning of change. That moment, captured on video, spread across the nation, not as a political tool, but as a mirror. Soon, Baltimore rewrote its own story, not through slogans, through choices. From coffee shop counters to police precincts, the phrase, "We remember Carter," became more than a slogan. It became a code for doing the right thing even when no one is looking. 3 years later, just a few blocks from the spot where Raymond J. Carter fell, a small bronze plaque was embedded in the sidewalk. Raymond J. Carter, 1939-2324, knocked down but never bowed. He taught a city how to stand. There was no towering monument, no ceremony with golden scissors, just a steady stream of people who came and paused, some touching the plaque, some weeping, most just whispering, "Thank you." A community center in East Baltimore now bears his name. Inside, children learn to read. Seniors gather for coffee and stories. And on the wall hangs a photograph of Raymond. No medals, no fame. Just a warm smile beneath his battered hat. Elijah, now 20, volunteers there. He studies social work at a nearby college. When asked why, he always says the same thing: because Mr. Carter saw me, and I want others to feel seen too. Raymond's story has become part of school curricula. Teachers speak of him not as a martyr, but as a mirror, a reminder of how quiet strength can shape generations. Every Memorial Day, someone places a brown hat beneath the city's veterans statue. No one knows who, everyone knows why. And when the city tried to forget its failures, tried to repaint the walls, remove the murals, scrub away the history, dozens of citizens stood in quiet defiance. One woman, a retired nurse, said, "He didn't need a statue. He became the conscience of a city that had forgotten how to care." Raymond J. Carter didn't seek recognition, but he left something no policy could erase: a city rediscovering how to look each other in the eye. He taught them how to stand. Now they walk every day, every block, remembering that kindness doesn't need praise. It just needs to be passed on. Maybe it was a moment, a word from a stranger, a hand reaching out when you had nothing left. Maybe it was someone who saw you, really saw you, when the world looked away. As you watched Elijah hold that old bloodied hat, or saw the quiet tremble in Raymond's weathered hand, did it remind you of someone in your life? A moment you've never told anyone about? Now is your time. Share it. Drop your story in the comments, not for applause, but so someone else might read it and feel less alone. One story can carry more light than 1,000 headlines. And if it matters to you, it matters to us.